I'm Landon, your Kentucky storyteller. And this is the Commonwealth Podcast, the stories of the wealth of life that Kentuckians possess through common means. Today I'm privileged to have with me a good friend of mine, Mr. Casey Fitzpatrick. Casey, thank you for joining us today on the Commonwealth Podcast. How are you, brother?
Doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, I want to begin, of course, our time together by introducing you to our listeners. So why don't we just begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, talk about your family, what you do, where you live, and so forth.
Yeah, so I'm Casey Fitzpatrick, originally from Louisa, Kentucky, which is also where Mr. Landon's from.
That's right.
Now I live in Ashland, Kentucky with my wife, Paige, and we have two boys, Hudson and Tucker. They're 6. I am currently a third-year pediatrics resident at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, hoping to practice general pediatrics at the end of the year.
Excellent. So let's go back to the beginning. Tell us, Casey, where you were born and talk a little bit about where you were raised there in Louisa and Lawrence County.
Absolutely. So actually I was born at King's Daughters here in Ashland.
Okay.
Just mom's OB was here, so that's where we ended up. But raised, from the time I went home from the hospital, was raised in Louisa. Technically Clifford.
Clifford?
Yeah, you know the area. About 20 minutes out of town. Grew up with my dad. He worked in the coal industry. Wasn't a miner per se. He was earlier in his career, but later in his career worked at the coal prep plant, was a foreman there. Mom was stay-at-home up through high school. Then once I got to high school and was kind of got my driver's license and could take me and the brother and sister to school, then mom went back to work and she's still working now. Pretty simple life, but it was well accounted for. We never wanted for much. My dad taught me what hard work was, and he taught me that I wanted to stay away from it as much as possible.
Of course. So your dad obviously perhaps was a big influence in your life growing up. Who were other bigger influences that you can think of maybe as a young child growing up and even as you were attending school there in Lawrence County? Who were your biggest influences? Yeah,
so obviously dad, family's always the first thing that comes to mind. But outside of that, some of the teachers that you have through school growing up, I especially remember Jane Lowe, who I know we both were very fond of. She was the high school music director, band director for a while, choir director, English teacher. She was kind of the jack of all trades, which was a big inspiration to me. As a fan of music, so I took to her really pretty early on.
Right.
David Prince, Chico, the laid-back country picker, big-time influence as well. Had him freshman year of high school and really inspired you to think out of the box a little bit, kind of get away from the thinking that maybe was instilled in us from an early age and kind of see the other perspectives of the different government styles and stuff outside of the United States, not much less Kentucky. But those were the guys that he especially was somebody I really looked up to. And then Jane kind of more so throughout the rest of high school when I decided that musician was something else I wanted to be. Outside of school, it's tough to think of other influences. I'm sure I had tons. My grandma was a big one.
Right.
She's a tough lady, raised 6 kids by herself, never really had much support outside of that. Single trailer, it's always a big drive, a motivator to get you going and kind of get out and do something.
Right. So those influences have certainly carried or made an influence on you, are still making an influence on you today.
Yeah. Have
you picked up any new influences as you went to college and now that you're moving forward in your career?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, now, so when I went to college, it was a big decision about what I wanted to do with my life. With I mentioned music was a big influence growing up. I was in the band, choir, that whole thing. And I was really good at English, thought maybe I wanted to be a lawyer for a while. And I started to go to college and I thought, growing up in Louisa, there are 2 big industries. There's the school system and there's the hospital.
Right.
And the hospital just seemed like a place where you can make a really positive impact. So I was like, maybe we'll give this medicine thing a try. So I've definitely picked up a lot of mentors through medicine itself. Medical school, I was in a rural program at the University of Kentucky's College of Medicine. And our rural campus director, Dr. Weaver, Tony Weaver, was a big influence, just a really independent thinker and somebody who was very motivated about bringing good health care to the people of central and eastern Kentucky.
Excellent.
He's right there in Moorhead. And then now Dr. Evans at Marshall, he's was the chairman of Pediatrics. He actually just stepped down this year, but he still practices over there. Really motivated. He's a lifetime, resident of this area, of the tri-state area, takes care of kids from Grayson to Logan County, just
Sure.
anybody all over the board over in West Virginia. So big influences there, just especially looking forward into my career at how I want to be as a doctor, how I want to help my patients, advocate for them, and be just a leader in the community, wherever that may be that I choose to settle down long term.
Right. So you moving to and going to school at UK and being there in Central Kentucky, you probably could have gone anywhere in the state of Kentucky, maybe to study and to serve, or maybe even outside of the state. I'm not entirely sure how all that works, but you chose to come back to Eastern Kentucky. So talk a little bit about why you chose to come back to Eastern Kentucky. Was that a decision that was based on your life mission? Share your experience with that.
Yeah, sure. So, the way kind of medical school works, I applied to several medical schools, UK, U of L, Marshall. Really, you kind of cast a wide net and you hope that you end up where you want to go. UK was where I wanted to be.
Sure.
They had the rural physician leadership program, which I was really, really interested in, being from a rural area. So once you finish medical school, you kind of have to decide your residency. So I picked pediatrics because I really liked kids, really enjoy making a positive impact throughout the patient's life. You pick them up when they're a baby, and then you send them off to college, and and then you hope that you were a positive impact in their life.
Hopefully you get their kids, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's the goal.
Right.
Choosing to come back to this area, specifically Marshall, was something that I realized pretty quickly living in Lexington and Moorhead. I moved to Moorhead as a third-year medical student because that was the rural side I was at. But Central Kentucky is a beautiful place. There's lots of stuff to do, but you quickly, these are my people.
Right.
Growing up around here, and it, and for everybody out there who's listening, who's not necessarily from the eastern part of the state, it's no matter what your differences may be, and there's certainly, everybody has a different viewpoint. It seems like we've all got each other's back in a way. Everybody's very cordial. We still hold doors open for each other.
Sure.
We'll offer an umbrella in the rain to a lady on the street. It's a very, very much cordial is the word that comes to mind, but we all are a big community. And I think when someone falls in this community, we want to lift them up.
Right.
And so thinking as a physician, as somebody who is going to be looked up to wherever I may go, these are the people that really I wanted to lead and to kind of touch on the next generation. So for now, I'm taking care of kids, Southern West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Southern Ohio. And they were kids that were just like me growing up in a town, really small town, usually probably people that worked in coal that now those jobs are gone and they're scrapping, trying to get by, and their graduating high school class is probably going to send 30% of them to college and the rest are going into the workforce.
Sure.
So those are the people that's me, that's you, that's, everybody we went to high school with. And it's when you see that and you can connect with those kids on a level that you're like, I know where you're at, man. I know what you're going through, whether they're a kid that wants to go to college or wants to go to work. If I'm not exactly like them and I want to go to college, if it's somebody who wants to go into the workforce, I know several people that did that and they're all very successful. So
excellent. Yeah.
You can shine that beacon for them right into to their future. Hopefully.
Sure. Yeah. There's a sense of it being home.
Yeah.
And home is where the people are that you're familiar with, the lifestyle, the culture that you're familiar with. And I definitely hear that that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So speaking of home, you've already touched on the fact, I believe, that you grew up in Lawrence County. So can you just describe your upbringing there? Reflect on that and describe, looking back, describe your upbringing in Louisa and Lawrence County and in Kentucky more broadly.
Yeah. So, thinking back, I was actually thinking about this morning on my drive home from work. I worked a night shift last night, just in general, what it was like growing up in this area and how did I get to where I am today, who I am today? Because I kind of had the thought in mind that that's where we were going to go with this conversation. And I was trying to think back to my first memory in life.
Wow.
Like I was going back and I think I'm sure I have earlier memories, but the one that came to mind this morning was my first day of kindergarten.
Oh, cool.
And I remember I cried like a baby. I was the biggest mama's boy, I couldn't leave. And my kindergarten teacher was Nora James, who was a friend of ours mother, and we grew up around him, but I didn't know her at the time. And I remember that she kind of took me and sat me on her lap and that whole thing. And again, that is the sense of community that you get in that area. And that's really, you hear that it takes a village to raise a child, but I feel like growing up in Louisa, Lawrence County, it definitely did take a village, whether it was Nora James or another teacher, or if it was my mom or dad, church leaders, anybody out in the community, they're going to be there for you.
Right.
As far as my personally growing up there, it's nothing too exciting. I went to school and I wasn't ever much of an athletics person, so I didn't play much sports. That's a big part of Eastern Kentucky, but I enjoyed watching. I have friends that played sports and stuff. I took kind of the music path.
Well, you were involved in the event.
Yeah, exactly.
From the music perspective, right?
Exactly.
Playing in the band.
Yeah. But, you make friends in all walks of life. I always thought that was interesting. You watch these TV shows and there are this caste system that shows up in all these like traditional TV shows. There's the jocks and the book smart guys and the music nerds. And I don't think we had that in our school. We had friends that intermingled in everything. I remember,
the football players were friends with the those who played in the band and the choir, and those people who were excelling in their studies and were very intelligent. It wasn't a big deal for them to be friends and hang out with those who needed a little more motivation. That's how I put it.
Absolutely. I remember being like on the academic team with the starting like tight end for the football team. Right. It's like, that's not something you think about in the big term, the long-term conversation about these things, but it's definitely something that happened.
Sure. So one of my favorite questions to ask when interviewing folks is really just to get a picture of what a typical weekend looked like in your family when you were growing up. Can you share some information on us?
Oh, yeah. So Saturdays were pretty lazy days. I can remember my dad mowing grass outside, and we were outside kind of playing. We had a little basketball hoop. It's still there, and we had a gravel driveway. So I remember playing basketball with my brother, and you would try to dribble, and it would hit a gravel, and it'd shoot off in a random direction, and we lost so many balls in the river.
Right.
They would roll over the hill. The big thing I remember, though, was definitely Sundays, because that was when Mamaw cooked dinner.
Yeah.
If it was a Sunday, we went to church, we'd go, and we'd come back, and Granny always had dinner ready. And she went to church, too, so I don't know where she found the time to do it, but it was always on the table.
Right.
And it was always soup, beans, and cornbread, but I didn't like soup, beans, and cornbread. I don't know what happened. I must have been a genetic abnormality or something, but everybody in my family loved that stuff. So my grandma figured out that I didn't like it. Yeah. And so she would always make me chicken tenders and mashed potatoes and corn in addition to making all that other stuff.
Right.
So I always remember just, walking across, and I was thinking this morning too about, it was always a big day, May 1st, because it was my sister's birthday, but that was also the day that we were allowed to go barefoot outside. Mom was like, okay, you're walking over to Granny's, you can go barefoot. It's May 1st. Because, if it was March 1st, we were going to get a cold, but going barefoot May 1st, it was fine. Right. But yeah, Sunday dinners and then NASCAR races. Dylan, my brother, was still is a huge NASCAR fan, and he's still got it on every Sunday when I go to his place. But I remember distinctly watching that. And then later I kind of got into sports, and we would watch football too. But
sure.
The grandma's house, that's the big one. Because it was right across the yard from our place, and I just remember walking over, and you get a plate, and the cousins are down, or the aunts and uncles are in from church, and you visit for a while and then go back home and get ready for school the next day.
Right. I think you're going to get a lot of flack from our Eastern Kentucky listeners that you don't like soup, beans, and cornbread.
I don't. And it's funny too, because I love refried beans at Mexican restaurants, which they're mashed soup beans.
Right.
So I don't know if it's a texture or like a look thing for me. It's just, I remember from a very young age just being completely opposed to it. My guess was, talking to my mom, that she used to feed it to me when I was really small, and I probably just got sick of it. And then now I just have this this leg to stand on. I'm like, I'm not going to eat it. So
I had a similar experience with mac and cheese.
Oh, yeah.
I guess growing up, I loved mac and cheese. And then when I got a little older, I hated it. And now I'm just coming around again to actually eating mac and cheese, which is silly, but certainly an experience. So who's your favorite NASCAR driver?
So growing up, it was Jeff Gordon, who has since retired. And honestly, I haven't kept up with it in years. So Jeff Gordon was probably the driver that I would still identify with most. I remember the day Dale Earnhardt died. I just remember watching it on TV.
Certainly.
And seeing the people crying on TV, and then people just being sad around the house, just in general. It's a vague memory, but I do remember that when that happened. And then I remember all the arguments at school where people were like, Jeff Gordon he wrecked Dale Earnhardt. And we were like, no, he didn't. He was nowhere near it. Having to defend the guy because he wasn't the most popular driver.
Sure, so, that is true.
So I wonder if that's why we identified with him a little bit, because he's definitely not like an Eastern Kentuckian in any way.
Right, exactly. So you said you grew to like football a little bit. So more college, NFL?
So Bengals, NFL. Actually, I'll tell you a funny thing is my dad was a huge Vikings fan in the 90s simply because of Randy Moss.
Sure.
So I remember we always had the Vikings on. So that's the first team I remember watching. In later years, I became more of a Bengals fan, just I think by identity of the place I can go watch football the closest. Now it's definitely more college for me. I enjoy watching, the Cats play on Saturdays now, which is not something that you always used to say.
Yeah, I've shared this before on an episode, but it's important because every time I hear that, I relate. I heard a deacon once tell me that I-64, he called it the Trail of Tears because you would go to Lexington Saturday morning, perhaps tailgate, watch the game, and you'd be so excited to see the Cats play, but you knew that Saturday night driving home to Eastern Kentucky, you were going to be crying the whole way. But things have gotten better for Kentucky football, and now it's a joy to watch them, and they continually get better.
Yeah.
So you touched on the fact that music has been a really big part of your life. And of course, I want to talk about that because as long as I've known you, really, and when we began our friendship, music was a big part of your life, and we bonded really in some form or fashion over music. So can you explain how you came to love music and how you came to play guitar and sing and do those sorts of things?
Yeah. So growing up, there's an old video. My parents used to make fun of me singing Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus on our counter. And the whole time I'm saying don't laugh at me, which only makes the parents laugh, makes the adults laugh harder. Right.
Right. Of course.
So I remember that. So honestly, I can say that I'm probably 3 in that video. So from a really, really early age, I loved music, just country music. And then when I got older, I was into rock, of course. And, we all go through those phases, and rap and all that and the other. As far as singing, that was probably the first thing I did. My dad played guitar growing up. Wow. But he was a busy dude, and he didn't really have time necessarily to sit down and give me lessons.
Sure.
And there weren't a ton of people giving guitar lessons in Louisa. So I remember I was starting high school, so I had to be 14 years old. Mm-hmm. And I told my dad, and I'd told him several times before that I wanted to learn to play guitar. And I think I picked it up for a day or two and put it back down. Never really did anything with it. But I remember being really serious about it, like turning 14. I don't know what it was, something to identify with in high school or something, that change in life. And it's like, I want to learn to do something new. So I remember he sat me down, showed me the basic chords, G, C, and D, country music.
Right.
And then I kind of took it from there, and I kind of taught myself with his guidance. And so that was through high school. I played in several bands. I got involved in the choir, and I joined the marching band too. And it's funny, that was a random thing too. I spoke of Jane Lowe earlier, big influence, and they just needed a bass drummer. And I was like, I can swing a mallet and hit a drum.
Give it a shot,
Give it a shot.
See how it goes.
I can count on time. So I did that. And then when I was a senior, marching season ended after football season, and then you had concert season, quote unquote, where you would play concerts as a band, and we had too many percussionists. So the choice was to play the triangle, or you could learn to play another instrument. And I didn't want to play the triangle, and I didn't necessarily want to argue over the marimbas or anything like that. So we had a spare tuba. So I grabbed it and I sat down next to Moose Arrington, which was the guy that we graduated high school with. I was like, I think I'm going to try and play tuba. And we sat down, he ran me through a couple scales, and I remember by the end of the year, we played like the state concert, like me playing tuba.
That's great.
It was just a random thing. So it was always kind of it was a slow but steady acceleration toward, the ultimate goal there.
Well, you've had an aptitude for it, and it sounds like you've just kind of had the ear to be able to sit down and pick at it and pick it up and excel in it. Now, obviously, you are very busy now, being a resident physician and having 2 kids, and we're going to talk about your twins here in a minute.
Yeah.
But, do you still find time to play music? How do you balance that?
Yeah. So for a long time, actually through medical school, I probably only picked my guitar up maybe 2-3 times.
Wow.
I probably did more than that, but to actually sit down dedicated, have a play session or something like that. But it's funny, 3-4 months ago, I just got this yearning to get back into it. I needed some kind of outlet. You know, it's a stressful job.
Right.
And I was like, I haven't played music in so long. So I bought a new guitar amp, and I bought this video game Rocksmith. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like Guitar Hero only for real guitar.
Sure.
And I'd always wanted to learn to solo. And I was always mostly a rhythm player. And I was like, I want to learn to play like solos. So I started from there. And then the past few months, I've really started playing a lot more. I kind of gave up on Rocksmith. It was too hard, but I did start learning scales and stuff, which was something I never got into before. But it is difficult to find that balance, especially when you're on an inpatient service working 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts, and really in between that time, whether it's on your day off or in the few hours that you may have, whether if you're on night shift, it may be the 2 hours before you go to work, or if you're on days, the 2 hours after. It's mostly spent with family, watching TV, help page just as much as I can to get the kids bathed and in bed.
Right.
So you really have to sneak away and take that few moments. So I've recently taken a liking to waking up really early in the morning and just picking around a little bit.
Yeah. Getting up before everybody else is up. That's the best time I found if you want to do anything for yourself, self-care, making sure that you wake up early for that time. That's good. So after graduation, where did you attend college?
So I went to Morehead State University. Okay. I remember I auditioned for the vocal program there because I was split on, did I want to do music? Did I want to do something else? Ultimately, I majored in biology, but I did do some vocal performance stuff there. I took a few vocal lessons. I had to audition into a studio to even be considered to major in it. So I got accepted into a studio, which happened to be opera. So I did opera for 2 years in college, which was fun. And then I got a little busy with the biology major, so I had to kind of drop that stuff. But Morehead was a good 4 years. I met a lot of awesome people, and ultimately it kind of set me on my, road to being a physician. They have a really, really, really strong biology program there. Now they even have a major for people that want to be professionals in the science field, whether that be like a chiropractor or dentist, doctor, those kinds of things, any kind of healthcare field, they have a major that you can take. At the time, it was just biology, so I remember having to take botany too, and core trees, which was actually probably my favorite class.
That's a unique experience for sure.
Yeah.
Was there a pre-med aspect to that, or?
Yeah, so basically at that time I chose biology, which was the major, and then you had to choose a track.
Sure.
And I chose the pre-med track. So I had a pre-med advisor who told me within the biology course curriculum which classes to take. And he was a big mentor. I didn't mention him earlier, David Saxon. He's since retired, but taught anatomy and pathophysiology and various things in the biology major. But he was my advisor through college and helped me pick the classes that I needed to be successful when I applied to medical school.
Right. So then after Morehead State, you went to University of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Okay. Describe to us what that experience was like. Obviously, Morehead and Lexington, two entirely different cultures. Would you say that?
Oh, absolutely.
Explain that for us. Tell us about your experience there.
So Lexington's definitely the biggest city, if you can even call it a big city. I don't really think it is, having traveled to big cities, but definitely the biggest city I've ever lived in. So a little bit of a culture shock having to deal with traffic, having to go to class in the morning and leave at 6 to be there at 8 was something new if you wanted to go down Nicholasville Road. In general, just the culture there is definitely a lot different. It's a college town, so
sure.
You carry some of that stuff from Morehead over, but so much bigger and so many more people and so much to do outside of classwork. Of course, being in medical school, I didn't get to enjoy too much of that.
Right, busy.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with newborn twins, which was kind of what happened right at the beginning of medical school. For anybody out there who's considering going to med school, I would not recommend having twins right before going.
Right. So you serve as a resident physician with Marshall Health.
Yep.
And Marshall's actually out of Huntington, West Virginia. Mm-hmm. So not in Kentucky. I see that you're wearing, for the audience, obviously they can't see that you're wearing your Marshall hat.
Yeah.
Marshall green this morning. But first describe to us what a resident physician is.
Sure.
And then I want you to talk to us a little bit about your choice to go into pediatrics.
Sure. So being a resident, basically when you finish medical school, you have your degree, but you don't have a license to practice independently. The last 2 years of medical school, you do clinical work. You basically shadow doctors around, but you don't make any real clinical decisions. So when you finish medical school, the last year you apply to residency. And that's a big decision because that's basically choosing the path that you're going to follow for the rest of your life, whether you're going to be an orthopedic surgeon or whatever it may be, and pediatrics, family medicine. Those are some of the popular ones. So you do that, and then so you go to residency, and in residency you are a doctor.
Yeah.
You introduce yourself as doctor, which is a little difficult and weird at first. I will say it took me 2 years or so to really feel comfortable saying I'm Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Sure.
I introduced myself as Casey for the first few years. But so you practice, but you have oversight. So every decision you make has oversight from an attending physician, which is ultimately what the final level per se would be. So you're guided, they teach you, but it's more focused to what you're doing, whereas medical school is more broad and they teach you everything on, you're going to do a rotation in surgery and family medicine. You get a little bit of a taste of everything. With residency, you just do what you want to do and they teach you all about it. And you hope to learn enough that after 3 years for me, some of them are a little longer. Surgery's 5 years. But at the end of 3 years, you go out and you can be a doctor all on your own, big boy doctor with no oversight. As far as pediatrics, when I went into medical school, I knew I wanted to be a primary care doctor.
Okay.
That I knew from actually probably before I even applied to medical school, that if I was going to ultimately do that, I wanted to do primary care. And the reason I had interest in primary care is that you have to know so much about everything. And I like to think of myself as a Renaissance man a little bit.
Sure.
But knowing enough about everything to where you recognize the limitations of your knowledge, which is something I pride myself on, knowing when I don't know that. Let me figure that out.
Right.
But knowing when to ask for help and such things. But you are responsible for coordinating the care of the patient. To, if they need a specialist, you can send them out. Or if it's something that's in your wheelhouse, you can treat it there. So I knew that going in. And then you do rotations in medical school and you work with the different services. And so I did a family medicine rotation, did an internal medicine rotation, which deal mostly with adults. And really quickly, the world of adult medicine, there's a lot of formulas. You get levels, lipid levels, and LDLs and HDLs and cholesterols and all these things, and you plug them into formulas, and then patients get stuck on medicines based on those formulas. Mm-hmm. Peds, you don't necessarily have as much of that. There are definitely formulas that I use all the time, but the big thing too is kids are just healthy by nature. It's weird for a kid to be sick, and so it's a big reward when you do get a sick kid and you can turn that around and you can see that change. But as I alluded to earlier, I think the biggest motivating factor is I like being seen as a leader, respected as a leader, and someone who can guide someone to make decisions or help them grow as a person. So with peds, you make that impact from the day the child's born. You're in the room when the kid's delivered. The parents take them home and they come back to your office 3 days later, and you're doing checkups and weight checks. And then 5 years later, they're going to school and you're seeing how they're doing, what they're learning, what new words did they learn this week? Did they know their times tables? And then before you know it, they're going off to college. Right. And you were someone who was there every step of the way. Mm-hmm. And probably outside of their family, you may be the only person that was there every step of the way.
Right.
Teachers come and go. You can only teach kindergarten, first grade, second grade. But from birth to adulthood, the pediatrician is the one constant.
Right.
Assuming that, people come to the doctor.
Right.
Which can be an issue.
So we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And COVID-19 is a hot issue. There are a lot of thoughts and opinions on it.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with it? We talked a little bit about this before we sat down and recorded, but I thought this would be good to really just throw in there as a conversation. What has been your experience with COVID-19 serving as a resident physician? And then just tell us, based on your medical experience and your education, what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts and opinions on the matter?
Yeah. So, with peds, we're blessed a little bit in that kids don't seem to get as sick as adults with COVID-19. I've had a few patients with it, but being in the hospital setting, I definitely see my colleagues in adult medicine who are having to deal with this every day. And you see the stress and the toll it takes on them.
Right.
I know last week I was checking out the census in our ER at Cabell Huntington, which is the hospital Marshall's affiliated with. And we had 18 overflow beds filled with patients who couldn't get into the hospital because they didn't have beds because we were full. Now, that's not all COVID, but it's a big part of it. The beds are full. We couldn't fill anymore. So that's weird. It's not something you see, is hospitals that are literally at their limit. So that's a big thing. I think people assume that as doctors, we don't get frustrated by the whole thing too. We're just big advocates, and we are, but it is, we don't like to wear masks just as much as anybody else.
Right.
And you're going to get conflicting data about, does it work? Does it not work? In my personal opinion, I think the masks, we've always known that they help, but at the beginning of this pandemic, we knew there was going to be a shortage. So
sure.
You can't, I don't want to say that they skewed it to make it sound like they weren't effective, but we definitely needed the masks in the hospital setting. Right. So if people were stockpiling them, it's a difficult and kind of a tenuous situation. Now, the fact of the matter is, it's a respiratory virus. It gets in the air. It's very small, particulate matter, and it can get through the mask. But what you have to understand is that the virus is carried in respiratory droplets that are pretty big in size. I'm using my hands to talk right now, so it's a little difficult to...
That's okay.
You can see it, no one else can. The respiratory droplets are bigger than the virus. So if you think of the virus as the tip of your pinky, and the respiratory droplet would be more of the size of your whole fist.
Sure.
So the idea is, as you expel those respiratory droplets that had the virus in it, obviously when water gets in the air, it evaporates, right? So eventually that dissipates, and then you have just floating viruses. Now that can get through the mask, but if both people are wearing the mask, both the person who's shedding the virus and the person who's talking to them or whatever, enough of those big droplets are going to get caught on the person's mask who's, carrying it and expelling it, to where it's hopefully not going to get out in the air. But then that barrier is going to protect them for anything that got through.
Sure.
It's not a perfect thing. People get infected. I've had friends they've tested positive and been exposed. I was exposed a couple weeks ago. I didn't have any symptoms. I promise.
Right.
But
that's good news.
Yeah. But it's a culture shock for everybody, from medicine to everything. And I personally don't foresee the culture changing too much until a vaccine is out, and an effective vaccine.
Right. And are we seeing the scientific process unfold before us? Because, it seems like when it began, what they were telling us then may not be the case now. And a lot of people are perhaps, throwing a fit about that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, they used to put asbestos in fire retardant material, and they used to put lead in paint.
Yeah.
And then eventually they realized, well, this is not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
So, maybe you can speak on that, and how this is really a process in science and medicine that we just have to try it out, see what works. Go ahead. You speak on that. You know more about it than me.
Yeah. The biggest thing about science is, if you remember back to elementary and middle school, they teach you about the scientific method. And you have this hypothesis and you test it and you think, I think that makes sense. Maybe that would work. So you try it. It didn't work. Let's adjust that. Try it again. That's what we're seeing right now. And it just happens to be a pandemic virus that's killed 100,000 people in this country. It's not a fun way to watch the scientific method play out, but it certainly is, what we've seen. So you had the initial data that came out of China, because that was where it started. And their doctors were saying, this hydroxychloroquine, it seems to work. So then there's this craze here. Oh, we got to try it. We got to try this hydroxychloroquine. It doesn't work. Yeah. We didn't know that at the time. There were initial reports, don't give steroids. They make it worse. And now that's part of the first line treatment for it. And we see really improved outcomes in people that get steroids early in the course. So that's medicine. That's science. Things change. There are no absolutes. You look at I always think about Copernicus and Galileo and the center of the universe. Is the Earth the center of the universe, or is the sun the center of the universe, or the solar system? And it throughout time it changed, and they were always ridiculed. It's like, no, we know it's not true.
Right.
And now it's like, now we know that, but who's to say that 1,000 years from now, our whole idea of what the universe even is, what could change in that time?
Sure.
It's always a shifting perspective.
Right.
And that's science. There is nothing that is absolutely true in science, and you just try it and you hope it works, and then you get the data to support it, and you're like, okay, this is pretty well supported, and that becomes a mainstay of treatment.
Right.
And it just carries out over time.
Good. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people who perhaps listen. Let's step away from COVID. Let's talk about a little bit about your kids. Mm-hmm. And where I want to begin, first is really the conversation that we had before, in that you were describing the tension of being a pediatric doctor while also having twins at home. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kids were born. So it's a funny story, actually, finding out when I found out that we were having the kid. Well, I guess we knew we were having kids. We didn't know we were having twins.
Yeah.
I was helping my brother move into college, and my mom didn't know. Nobody knew. It was me and Paige, and I think she probably blabbed her mouth to a couple of her cousins or something. But it was a limited group, and she had her first OB appointment, like the 8-week appointment where they do the confirmatory ultrasound. And I had promised my mom ahead of time that I'd help her move my brother into his dorm.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't avoid that situation without breaking the news that we're having a baby, and you don't want to tell that now. She was like, well, it's no big deal. It's the initial ultrasound. It's just a little ball. I'll show you the picture. It'll be sweet. We'll cry. It'll be a good time. But it's not too much. I'll take my friend. We'll have a dinner. It'll be fine. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then I said the worst thing I've probably said in my life, although it's the best thing now. Just don't call and tell me it's twins. And I'm not, I kid you not. We were in the car with my mom and my brother, and she calls me just hysterically crying and was like, it's twins. And I was like, she said the doctor was mortified. I can't even imagine being in that situation. But, so they were 4 months old when I started medical school. You kind of alluded to how they've impacted my education and my career. The biggest thing, and I tell people this all the time, and she's going to say I'm lying when she listens to this, Paige is, but she works way harder than I do.
Yeah.
And I would not have made it through without her.
Sure.
It's just the plain matter of fact.
Right. With 2
babies, it's impossible to go away to work and do all that and also raise those kids on no money, because I was broke. I didn't have any money. We were living in Lexington, 3 hours away from the nearest family member. There's not much help there, so we kind of leaned on each other a lot. And I was lucky in the sense that at UK the medical school recorded lectures and put them online. So if I couldn't make it to class because I was up at 4 a.m. feeding a baby, I could listen to it.
Wow, that's great.
Later. So that was good. There were some hands-on things that were required, anatomy lab and things like that, but the schedule was more flexible that way. So that was a big help. And I think that's kind of standard across the country with medical school now.
Right.
The idea is to go to class and then listen back to it. But if you can't make it, it's always there. You don't get behind. Now that I'm out and in practice and being in pediatrics and having the kids at home, it's sobering in a way when you see terrible situations or kids that are really sick, and you always have your kids in the back of your mind, and it becomes this difficult balance of trying to block that out. But then when you come home, it's like you got to switch to the other side, right? Because then you have to have that empathy and that love and that warmth.
Sure.
And I certainly have love and warmth with my patients as well. But if you're in a situation like I'm working in the pediatric ICU right now, and you see kids that are traumas and terrible situations where brain injuries, or, they're intubated because they have really bad asthma attack, whatever it may be, you see kids in these really, really bad situations, and the outcome's not always great. And you have to find that balance of having the appropriate amount of empathy and seeing that human as a child and not just a patient that you're taking care of, but also seeing them as a patient that you're taking care of, and you have to remove yourself from the situation a little bit. So it's a difficult balance, but ultimately a rewarding experience having the boys with me on this journey. When they were younger, the joke was Dr. Dad is what they always called it, but I don't know that they quite grasp the fact that I really am a doctor. Sometimes I think they get it a little bit. I think right now they just know I work a lot. Sure.
So raising 2 boys who are 6, I imagine that is difficult. They're probably, did you say wild? And
might be an understatement right there.
Might be an understatement.
Yeah, a little bit. No, they're good kids, man. We're also lucky in that sense, in that with very little guidance and very little help starting out in Lexington, it's a little easier now. We're a little closer to home, but they really have turned out great. They're so smart, just bright kids, know their times tables, and when they were in kindergarten, just from watching YouTube videos.
Wow.
Like, I had no input in that, I promise. Math was my weakest subject, so that's not me at all.
Sure.
And Paige, she'll be the first one to admit she wasn't great at math either. So that, I don't know where that came from.
Right.
But really bright kids, really well behaved in that sense, but also, they're wild for sure. They're best friends, worst enemies at the same time. It's typical brother stuff.
Right.
He hit me, and then later they're like, laying next to each other, cuddled on the couch watching TV, or they can't go to sleep if they're not in the same room. So they won't stay all night with one, one's not going to go away.
Wow.
Yeah, they're at the hip. So
that's cool.
Their kindergarten teacher this year actually suggested that we separate them so they're identical twins. I don't think we mentioned that, but
right.
And they're very, very identical. I obviously can tell them apart, but it was a struggle when they were a little younger, even for us.
Sure.
But, so at school, it's frustrating for them because kids don't know who they are. They call one Tucker or one Hudson, and it's like, no, I'm Tucker. And their teacher was saying that she sees it every day. So it's really kind of put a difficult decision in our lap where we're like, I don't think we can separate them right now, even though it's frustrating to them. So I think maybe we just might start dressing them differently.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. I think maybe let them dress themselves with a little individuality, because they're, as much as they look alike, they're far different in personality.
Wow. Well, let's move into what I'm calling the lightning round.
Okay.
And the challenge is that you would just answer these few questions, maybe in 2 or 3 words.
Sure.
Okay. So first question, where is one place in Kentucky that you would take someone who had never been in Kentucky?
Rupp Arena.
Excellent. How would you describe Kentucky to a person that has never been to Kentucky?
Home is what I would say.
Home.
But to someone who's never been here, I would say beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What is your most memorable moment in Kentucky history?
It's a great question. So in my lifetime, that would probably be the biggest thing I can think of. That's not one I was expecting, man. You got me on the spot with this one. I don't know.
Okay.
Hold on, let me think about it. I really want to answer this because that's great. I'm a big historian guy. I have to go with this is going to sound stupid, but I'm obsessed with these videos of Secretariat, winning the Kentucky Derby.
Sure.
So that's what's standing out in my mind. And it's so silly because it's not really Kentucky history. I guess it's kind of a sports national history, but I would say Secretariat wins the Derby. There you go.
Excellent. So do you like L8?
A little.
Yeah. Okay. Have you tried the new flavors, cherry and orange soda or orange cream? I can't remember the name of it. Do you like I
like the orange. Okay. I tried that. It was good. Yeah.
Good. So if you could live anywhere else in the world besides Kentucky, where would it be?
Man, it's a good one. Scandinavia.
Yeah. That's why. That seems unique.
The beauty. Honestly, if you look at pictures and stuff of that area, very pretty, mountainous areas, green. And then the people there are also, I've never been there, but you hear the stories of how friendly and nice and helpful they are. So I just feel like it's maybe a place on the opposite side of the world that would be close to home.
Sure. Well, I'm going to correct my introduction from earlier, and I'm going to say Dr. Casey Fitzpatrick. It's been a delight. If people want to get in touch with you on social media or what have you, how can they do that?
So I'm on Twitter, cfitzy92. It's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I do have Facebook. You can find me on there as well. I don't think I have very many privacy settings. There's not too much to hide. I'm on there, but I don't have the app on my phone, so I don't always check on that. But I've got the Messenger app if they want to shoot a message at me.
Well, thank you for joining the Commonwealth Podcast, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the Commonwealth Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, let me encourage you to head on over to iTunes and give us an honest 5-star review. If you wish to connect with us on social media and be updated on upcoming shows, giveaways, etc., you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Commonwealth Stories and on Twitter at CWealth Stories. And we'll be releasing a new episode of Commonwealth every week. So be sure that you hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast catcher to be updated. And thank you again for joining the effort as we seek to show the wealth of life that Kentuckians possess through common means.